The trailer has been released and an interview has taken place. In addition, there have been 2 articles. In this video, I'll be covering everything we know about Avowed, as well as what is very likely to be in the game based on all the information available, as well as the inevitable opinion piece, as I cannot help but opine a bit about the potential of the game for good or for ill. Now overall, to restate it yet again, because I think it is important, Avowed is not a sandbox RPG, although initially planned as an open-world RPG a la Skyrim. It's going to be a much more contained game with large hubs, but heavy focus on story and companions. In this sense, those who are looking forward to Skyrim 2.0 will be sorely disappointed. For my own part, I think developers should focus on their strengths rather than their weaknesses, and I personally would prefer a more compact game with greater depth than pure size. I will leave the latter to Bethesda. Many people have been alarmed by this, as the CEO of Obsidian himself has cited the change in development direction, but I think it's only disappointing if you had expected a Skyrim clone, which many people admittedly had done. So let's first reiterate some things that we definitely know. Avowed takes place in the Living Lands, an island continent far to the north, known for its highly differentiated biomes, and strange and wild creatures and plants. Apart from this, not much is known about the Living Lands. There are settlements and areas where Kith or humanoids live, but it is by no means as established as settlements and civilization compared to continents such as Adir and the Eastern Reach, the latter of which being the setting for the first Pillars of Eternity game. Now, having the game take place in the Living Lands makes a lot of sense from my perspective. It has a surprise factor, because we just don't know much about it compared to more populous and quote-unquote civilized continents, and allows the developers some flexibility. Though part of me wonders if they chose the Living Lands in part because it plays into the goofy, almost Play-Doh-like art style. Still, just as the southern archipelago Deadfire was interesting to explore for its novelty, so too do I hope the Living Lands will be. One thing 100% confirmed is the fact that despite the many Kith or humanoid races of Eora, you will only be able to play a human or an elf. There are 2 possible explanations for this. Both are equally plausible to my mind. Explanation 1. Obsidian ran out of the budget Microsoft gave them to make the game and cut out all the other Kith races. Plausible for sure. The other possibility, more likely related to game lore and story, is that elves and humans are the Kith that comprise the Adirian Empire. So the limitation of elf or human is an extension of that. But I would be lying to say that I'm not somewhat disappointed by this, as Eora has a plethora of interesting races with differing abilities, but then again, it's not the end of the world. Your official role is that of an envoy sent by the Adirian Empire to investigate the plague in the Living Lands. But apart from these few locked-in options, you can fully design your appearance, personality, and philosophy in your role as an envoy. We know that companions are very important. There are probably several, and you will always have at least 2 at your side when adventuring. The one who is known as Kai, who is an idealistic and pragmatic soldier and veteran with an odd sense of humor, who narrates the trailer, and who espouses heavy skepticism towards your mission. As we know that for better or worse, Avowed is going to be a hub world similar to Outer Worlds, and Outer Worlds had a total of 6 companions, I think it is a safe bet that there will be 6 companions in Avowed that we can rotate through and take with us as we see fit. We also know that the companions will be deeply tied to the story rather than just sidekicks you drag along with you for fun. In terms of character interaction, dialogue will be a lot like the Outer Worlds, which for all its flaws was one of the stronger suits of that game, so I'm glad that this format will be included. As yet, we really know very little about how the story-related RPG elements will work, how they will have consequences or affect your companions. At this stage, it's anyone's guess. But we do know a fair bit more about the combat, which the lead director has stated is very much the game's bread and butter. By narrowing down the size and scope of the game, they've put an extreme focus on the combat, and I think the trailer definitely suggested that. But don't expect a continuation of class-based systems that were present in Pillars of Eternity. Instead, expect a classless system with different skill trees that you can truly specialize in, or mix and match as you see fit. Leveling up involves unlocking new skills and skill trees, rather than focusing on stats, and this shouldn't be all too surprising given that many modern games eschew stats and primarily focus on abilities and skills. This doesn't need to be a bad thing inherently as long as it's well done, And going hand in hand with this is the actual feel of combat. According to the developers, weapons feel different when attacking. So for example, a mace will feel different to an axe, which in turn will feel different to a sword. One can dual wield magic, weapons, or any combination of both. And of course, should you want to, you can always make use of firearms to make your point and combine them in the same fashion. Magic really looks like magic, with unique effects and visuals for each spell you cast, making it feel very meaty. And speaking of weapons, you will be able to upgrade them, which according to developers means meaningful changes that you will actually feel in combat as opposed to simple stat increases. Perhaps something akin to the way weapon upgrades worked in Deadfire, with sometimes vastly different abilities being conferred upon the weapon. If you recall from the trailer, for example, we saw a frost axe that seemingly froze the opponent. So imagine similar such effects with other elements as well. The real unanswered question, unfortunately, is whether or not magic will be anchored to the traditions of Pillars of Eternity, namely wizard magic, priest magic, druid magic, cipher magic, or even paladin powers. I have my doubts. In this sense, I think Avowed will part ways with its predecessor games immensely. And those would be the things we know officially, but there are a number of things we ought to address that require some speculation. One thing that many people have wondered about is the seeming shift from an original sales pitch of open-world Skyrim-esque to something more comfy and contained, and this probably happened around the time when Avowed was rebooted. There was an internal reboot of the game, the date of which is not entirely known, but it definitely shifted the direction of the game, and quite possibly the art and graphics. Let's be honest, neither the art nor the graphics are mind-blowing. Despite this, they appear to be serviceable. Obsidian games have never been known for being a graphical powerhouse. Instead, their games have always looked just that, serviceable, good enough, and worked for the games they made. No one loves New Vegas, after all, because it has groundbreaking graphics. Now, I was and am somewhat disappointed by the look, to be perfectly honest, as I was in fact expecting something grimmer and darker. An art style that, although different, preserved the dark edge that was very much present in the isometric Pillars of Eternity games. And earlier concept art seemed to reflect this. From the little that we've seen, Avowed does not deliver on that, though one could easily argue that it's the Living Lands itself that simply looks different from other parts of Eora, and the game's art direction simply reflects that. But let's be honest, as a die-hard fan of the world of Eora, I'm willing to take the hit, and I'll get over my disappointment, as I'm not yet ready to give up on Avowed because of this. It would take a lot more to turn me away from Eora. And speaking of Eora, one thing I worry about is continuity. The lead director has stated that you don't need any experience with Pillars of Eternity games to play and enjoy Avowed, which is fair enough, as they're trying to open up the game to a larger pool of players. But Pillars was and is important to Eora, and the lore and stories is what gives us the entirety of what we know about this universe. There will be some Easter eggs and some characters from Deadfire that we'll possibly recognize, but beyond that, do not expect much in the way of direct continuity, which I personally find disappointing. Josh Sawyer, the original mastermind behind Pillars, once said that Eora was very big and that there are more stories to be told than that of the Watcher, the Gods, and the Wheel. And yet, at least the latter two, if you have any experience with Pillars, strike me as very important. The Wheel and the Gods are a large reason as to why Eora is interesting in the first place, which leads us to the burning question on everyone's mind. Is Avowed a prequel or a sequel? The most straightforward answer would be it could be either. Whilst it's true the developers have stated that you will meet characters you recognize from Deadfire, that does not necessarily mean you will be meeting your old companions. Perhaps what's meant by that is that you'll meet certain arch-magi, or somebody else. The more subtle and likely answer, as to whether or not the game is a prequel or sequel to the events of Pillars, is that it's probably irrelevant to the story of Avowed. Although the original CG trailer suggested a deep involvement of the gods, in which we saw a statue of Galawain and a banner that was obviously related to Woodica, the goddess of oaths, the gods have not been mentioned. So it's entirely possible the story of Avowed is a great departure from what we've come to expect with Pillars. Now going forward, I think we won't be learning too much more about Avowed until after the Starfield release. And hopefully, they'll be showing us some of the RPG systems, whether character builds, dialogue, or more. I am cautiously optimistic, but that's only because I love the Pillars universe so much, and I'll definitely be talking about it a lot more going forward when more information is available. If you like this content and lore videos in general on RPGs, consider joining my Discord server. And as always, thank you for tuning in. If you could leave a like, comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel, it'd be much appreciated. And I'll check you out next time. Take care.